I need a wife. Fake one. 30 days. I'll pay off every cent of your brother's medical bills, every last dollar." Harper Lane stared across the diner counter at Wyatt Calder like the man had lost his mind. The most powerful rancher in Silver Ridge, Texas, a man whose name made bank presidents sweat, was standing in her section, Stetson in hand, asking her to lie for him. She almost laughed. She almost said no. But then her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Another hospital notification. Another number she couldn't breathe past. Harper set the coffee pot down slowly. "Talk," she said. "If this story already has you hooked, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button and follow along all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel." Wyatt Calder did not do desperation well. He had built an empire from cracked earth and sheer will. He had survived droughts, market crashes, a divorce that gutted him like a hunting knife, and a custody battle that had aged him 10 years and 8 months. He was 39 years old, worth more money than most people in Silver Ridge would ever count in 3 lifetimes, and he had never not once walked into a situation he didn't control. Until now. He sat down in the booth across from Harper Lane without being invited. She noticed that. She also noticed he didn't look like a man who was used to asking for anything. His jaw was set hard. His eyes were flat and direct, the color of a winter sky the moment before a storm rolls in. He had the kind of stillness about him that either meant he was very calm or very close to breaking. And Harper had waited enough tables dealt with enough difficult people to know the difference wasn't always obvious from the outside. She refilled his coffee without asking. He didn't thank her. She pulled her order pad from her apron and held her pen ready. Not because she thought he was about to order anything, but because holding something gave her hands a job and kept her expression neutral. 30 days, Wyatt said. You attend 3 family events with me. You stay at Calder Ranch. You act like my wife in front of my family's board of trustees and my father's old attorney, Gerald Marsh. You do not tell anyone the arrangement is not real. At the end of 30 days, you walk away with $120,000 deposited directly into whatever account you choose. Harper kept her face very still. And you're asking me because you don't run in my circles. Because nobody on that board knows you. Because you look like someone who can hold herself together under pressure. He paused. And because I did my homework, Ms. Lane. I know your brother Danny is at St. Catherine's in Austin. I know his treatment costs are past $90,000. I know your mother took a second job and it still isn't enough. The pen stopped moving. Something cold moved through Harper's chest. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific discomfort of being seen clearly by someone you had not given permission to look. You had someone investigate me, she said quietly. I had someone confirm what I needed to know before I made an offer. He said it without apology, without flinching. I don't make investments I haven't researched. I'm not an investment. No, Wyatt said. You're someone who needs money, and I'm someone who needs a convincing wife for 30 days. That's a transaction, not personal. Harper looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the coffee cup he hadn't touched. She looked at his hands, big scarred rancher's hands, the kind that told you someone had actually worked for what they had. She looked at the line of tension across his shoulders that he was working very hard to disguise as confidence. Why do you need a fake wife at all? She asked. A man like you, why not just find a real one? Something moved across his face. Just briefly. Just enough. Because a real one takes time I don't have, he said, and trust I'm not willing to give. The inheritance hearing is in 32 days. I need to demonstrate to the board that I am a stable family man, capable of running the Calder estate without oversight. My ex-wife's legal team has been feeding them stories. I need to counter that narrative, quickly. By lying to them. By presenting a version of my life that reflects my actual intentions, not the fiction my ex-wife's attorney has constructed. Harper set the pen down on the counter. Those are 2 very different things, and you know it. Wyatt met her eyes and did not look away. $120,000, Ms. Lane. Your brother gets his full treatment, Your mother stops working double shifts. You walk back out of my life at the end of 30 days, and I never bother you again." He picked up the coffee cup. "Think about what I'm actually offering, not what you feel about the way I'm offering it." Harper hated that he was right. She hated it with her whole chest. She did not say yes that night. She drove the 40 minutes back to the apartment she shared with her mother in a silence so thick it had weight. She sat at the kitchen table after midnight with Danny's most recent medical invoice in her hand, and she did a calculation she had already done 100 times the money coming in. The money going out, the gap between them that kept widening no matter how many shifts she picked up, no matter how carefully she budgeted, no matter what she sold or sacrificed or went without. The gap didn't close. It grew. Her mother, Ruth, found her at the table just before 2 in the morning, still in her waitress uniform, the invoice face up between her palms. "Baby," Ruth said quietly, sitting down across from her. "What happened?" Harper told her. All of it. The booth, the offer, the number. She watched her mother's face go through several things at once. Shock, then a complicated kind of relief, then something that looked a lot like fear. "Harper, I know. That man is not—" "I know, Mama. Wyatt Calder has a reputation in this county that is not—" "I know." Harper finally looked up. "But Danny's running out of time, and I have run out of other ideas." Ruth was quiet for a long time. "It would just be 30 days, she finally said. "That's what he said. And he put it in writing." Harper paused. "He didn't mention a contract." "Then you go back," Ruth said firmly, "and you tell that man there will be a contract. Signed, specific, and witnessed. You are not walking into Wyatt Calder's house on a handshake and a rich man's word." She called the number on the card he had left on the diner counter tucked under the coffee cup he finally drank from before he left. Like he had never doubted she would reach out, and she told him she had conditions. He said he expected nothing less. They met at his attorney's office the following morning. The contract was 4 pages long. Harper read every word of it. Wyatt sat across the conference table and watched her read without rushing her, without trying to explain anything away, without the kind of performative patience that was actually just impatience wearing a more polite mask. He just waited. She looked up when she reached page 3. "This clause," she said, pointing. "It says, I'm not permitted to speak to journalists, former associates of yours, or members of the Inheritance Board without your prior written consent. That's too broad. I'm not signing away my right to speak at all." Wyatt looked at his attorney, a lean man named Clifton, who had been with the Calder family for 20 years. Clifton gave a small shrug. "Narrow it," Wyatt said. "Specifically to matters pertaining to the arrangement itself. She keeps general freedom of communication." "Done," Clifton said, making a note. Harper turned the page. "Payment in 2 installments. $60,000 upfront, the remainder at the end of 30 days upon completion of all agreed obligations." Wyatt didn't blink. "40 upfront, 80 at completion. I need to know you'll see it through." "My brother needs the money now, not in 30 days. 60 upfront," Wyatt countered. "If you agree to a penalty clause that returns 20 if you exit the arrangement before day 20. Harper looked at him steadily. 50 up front, 70 at completion, no penalty clause. If I walk out of your house, it's because you gave me a reason to." Clifton looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at Harper. "Done," he said. She signed at noon. Wyatt signed at noon. Clifton witnessed both signatures and kept the original. Harper walked out of that office telling herself it was just a job. A difficult, complicated 30-day job for a difficult, complicated man. She told herself the money was the only thing that mattered. She told herself she could keep her feelings in a box she was good at, that had been doing it since her father left when she was 12, since Danny got sick, since the world started asking more from her than it ever seemed to intend to give back. She told herself she was in control of this. She was not prepared for what happened at 7:37 that evening, inside the front hall of Calder Ranch, when a small voice said, "Are you going to be my new mama?" "Ish right." Lily Calder was 7 years old, with dark eyes, the exact color and seriousness of her father's, and a gap between her two front teeth that gave her smile a lopsided sweetness that was almost unbearable to look at straight on. She was standing at the base of the main staircase in her pajamas, pale blue, with little horses printed on them, and she was looking at Harper with the kind of direct, unguarded hope that children are still capable of before the world teaches them it's safer to expect less. Harper's heart did something she wasn't prepared for. She crouched down to the little girl's level. "My name's Harper," she said carefully. "What's your name?" "Lily." The gap-toothed smile. "Daddy said you were coming to stay with us. Are you going to stay a long time?" Harper chose her words the way you choose footing in uncertain terrain, carefully one step at a time. "I'm going to stay for a little while," she said. "Is that okay with you?" Lily considered this with the gravity of a child who had been disappointed before and learned to calibrate her hope accordingly. Then she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around Harper's neck, pressing her small face against Harper's shoulder. "Please don't leave like the others," she whispered. The words were so small, so quiet. Just 7 words spoken into the collar of Harper's jacket. But they landed with the weight of everything no one in this house had said out loud in a very long time. Harper held the little girl and looked up over her head. Wyatt was standing in the doorway to the hall. He had seen the whole thing. And for just a moment, one unguarded, undefended moment, something moved across his face that had nothing to do with contracts or inheritance hearings or carefully maintained control. It looked like pain. It looked like guilt. It looked like a man watching his daughter do something he had taught himself not to do years ago, and not being able to decide whether he was grateful or devastated that she still could. Then he cleared his throat and looked away. "I'll have Mrs. Phelps show you your room," he said, his voice back to its flat business register. "Dinner's at 7. Board attorney arrives Thursday. We'll go over the background details tomorrow morning before you meet anyone." Harper straightened up. Lily held her hand without being asked. "Fine," Harper said. She followed Mrs. Phelps up the stairs, Lily's hand in hers, and told herself again firmly, deliberately, with everything she had, that she was in control of this. She almost believed it. The background detail session happened the next morning in Wyatt's study at 9 o'clock sharp. He had coffee waiting. He had a folder of information prepared, dates, names, a timeline of their supposed relationship, constructed to be plausible without being complicated. He was thorough. He was organized. Harper was beginning to understand a man who treated every situation in his life as a problem to be systematically solved. She sat across the desk from him and went through the folder page by page. "We met 14 months ago," she said, reading, "at the Silver Ridge Agricultural Fair. My team felt that was a natural intersection point between your world and mine. Public event, easy to verify that you were there. Was I there?" A pause. "We confirmed you worked a food vendor shift that day." Harper looked up. "You confirmed it before or after you decided that's where we met?" Wyatt's jaw tightened very slightly. "After. So you built the story around existing facts." She returned to the folder. "That's actually smart." "I'm glad it meets your approval," he said, dry as dust. "We dated casually for 6 months before I moved in." She turned the page. "You proposed in January during a private dinner at the ranch. No public witnesses. That was intentional. The board can't disprove what no one else saw." "Right." She closed the folder and set it on the desk between them. "Now tell me the things that aren't in this folder." Wyatt studied her. "What do you mean?" "I mean that if a lawyer or a board member sits across from me and asks me something specific about you, not your business history, not your public record, but something personal, and I give a rehearsed answer, they will know." She met his eyes directly. "I've been waiting tables for 6 years. I can tell when someone's running a script. So can people who've spent their careers in boardrooms watching witnesses." She paused. "Tell me something real." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Lily's middle name is Ruth, after my grandmother." He said it like he was testing the weight of giving out actual information. She's afraid of thunderstorms. She sleeps with a worn-out stuffed rabbit named Captain. She failed to eat anything except chicken nuggets for 3 weeks when she was 5, and her mother left for the first time." He stopped. "She started asking about you at 6 this morning. Mrs. Phelps told me." Something softened in Harper's chest. She held it still. "What's your grandmother Ruth like?" Harper asked. "Was Wyatt corrected? She died 4 years ago. Ran this ranch alone for 11 years after my grandfather passed. Toughest woman I've ever known." "What would she think about what you're doing right now?" Wyatt's expression shifted. "She'd say I was being a damn fool going about things the hard way again." For one unplanned second, the corner of Harper's mouth almost moved. "Okay," she said. "Now we're getting somewhere." Japabjeg. Thursday arrived with Wyatt's family attorney, Gerald Marsh, 63 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who had been measuring people against invisible standards his entire professional life and rarely found them adequate. He came with 2 members of the inheritance board, a woman named Catherine Albright, who wore her wealth like a light coat, and a retired judge named Horace Dunbar, who watched everything with eyes that registered nothing but missed nothing either. They gathered in the ranch's formal sitting room at 2 in the afternoon. Harper had changed into the clothes Wyatt's personal shopper had sent over, simple, tasteful, Western-influenced, without being costume-like. She had her hair down. She sat beside Wyatt on the sofa, with 3 inches of deliberate, appropriate space between them. The first 10 minutes were pleasantries. Harper held her coffee cup and smiled and answered questions about how she and Wyatt had met in the comfortable, slightly amused tone of a woman recounting a story she'd told enough times to find it charming again. Then Gerald Marsh said, "Miss Lane, forgive me. Mrs. Calder, your background is quite different from the families this board typically encounters." "It is," Harper agreed pleasantly. "A waitress," Catherine Albright said. Not unkindly exactly, but the word had weight in her mouth, the kind of weight that was meant to remind you of something. "For now," Harper said. "I'm also 3 credits from finishing my business management degree online. I took a leave of absence when my brother got sick. I'll return to it once he's stable." She held Catherine's gaze. "I imagine you've met plenty of women who started with less than you expected and built more than you anticipated." Catherine Albright's eyebrow lifted precisely 1 centimeter. Wyatt's hand resting on the cushion between them moved half an inch closer to hers without touching. Gerald Marsh asked about their timeline. Harper answered without consulting the folder, without missing a beat, weaving the fabricated history through genuine emotional detail, the way she'd practiced referencing Lily's rabbit, Wyatt's grandmother's name, the small, true things that gave the false framework its bones. Then Horace Dunbar, who had not spoken once, said quietly, "Mr. Calder, your daughter seems very attached to Miss Lane." Everyone looked. Lily had appeared in the doorway. Nobody had noticed her arrive. Wyatt started to rise. "Lily." "Is Harper staying forever?" Lily asked, directly, to the whole room. The silence stretched. Harper looked at the little girl. Then she looked at Wyatt. She saw something she hadn't seen on his face before. Not calculation, not control, but actual fear. The specific fear of a father who had already watched his daughter be hurt once and was watching the possibility of it approach again from a direction he couldn't outmaneuver. Harper set her coffee cup down. She looked at Lily and said simply, "Honestly, I'm here right now, sweetheart, and I'm not going anywhere today." It was not a lie. It was also not a promise she could keep forever. But Lily smiled her gap-toothed smile and said, "Okay," and disappeared back down the hallway like a small, satisfied storm that had already gotten what it needed. Horace Dunbar looked at Harper for a long moment. "Good instincts," he said, which from a man who had spoken 4 words in 45 minutes seemed to mean considerably more than 2. Gerald Marsh reached for his water glass. Catherine Albright looked at her lap, and Wyatt, in the chair beside Harper, exhaled very, very slowly, the kind of exhale that has been held for hours, maybe longer, and finally finds its way out. Harper did not look at him, but she felt it. She felt the whole weight of it released just slightly, just barely, the way a knot gives just a fraction before it finally comes loose. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she was in control. Outside the sitting room windows across the wide, flat miles of Calder Ranch, the afternoon light was going gold over the grasslands, and the horses were running the fence line the way they always did at this hour, with no reason anyone could name, just because they were alive, and the ground was solid and the sky was open, and sometimes that is enough reason for anything. But Harper wasn't looking at that. She was looking at her hands in her lap, and she was thinking about the word home, what it actually meant, who got to have one, and why it was that the places you were never supposed to belong sometimes felt against all logic, against every wall you'd ever built around yourself like the first place you'd ever actually fit. The morning after the board visit, Harper woke up before the sun, not because she had somewhere to be, not because an alarm went off, but because she had spent most of the night lying in a bed softer than anything she'd ever slept in, staring at the ceiling, listening to the particular silence of a big house that had forgotten what it felt like to be full. And somewhere around 4 a.m, her body gave up on rest entirely and decided that moving was better than lying still with her own thoughts. She found the kitchen by following the smell of coffee that was already brewing. Mrs. Phelps, the housekeeper, was a compact woman in her late 60s who moved through the Calder house with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned years ago that the best way to be indispensable was to make everything look effortless. She looked up when Harper appeared in the doorway. "You're up early," Mrs. Phelps said. Not unkindly, just observing. "Old habit," Harper said. "Diner opens at 6. My body hasn't figured out I'm not going in." Mrs. Phelps set a mug on the counter without being asked. "How do you take it?" "Black is fine." Harper wrapped both hands around the mug. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "How long have you worked for the Calders?" Mrs. Phelps considered the question the way experienced people consider questions that have more underneath them than they show on the surface. 22 years, she said finally. Started under Robert Calder, Wyatt's father. Stayed on when Wyatt took over the estate. And before the divorce. Was it like this? Mrs. Phelps was quiet for a moment. The coffee maker finished its cycle with a low hiss. "Before the divorce," she said carefully. "There was noise in this house, children running, music sometimes. Robert Calder used to have the hands in for dinner on holidays, 30-40 people at that table." She looked at the long dining room visible through the archway. "After the divorce, Mr. Calder shut most of it down, said it was simpler, said Lily didn't need the chaos." She paused. "I think he meant he couldn't manage the quiet and the noise at the same time anymore. So he chose the quiet because it was easier to control." Harper looked into her coffee. "That sounds lonely," she said. "It is," Mrs. Phelps said plainly. "For both of them." Wyatt found her at the paddock fence an hour later. She was standing with one of the younger ranch hands, a 19-year-old named Travis, who had the kind of easy laugh that suggested he hadn't been beaten down by enough life yet, watching a chestnut mare pace the enclosure with agitated, uneven steps. "She's been off her feed 2 days, Travis was saying. "Doc checked her yesterday, said it's stress. She came to us from a bad situation over in Haskell County. Previous owner wasn't well." He stopped himself. "She doesn't like confined spaces much, and she doesn't trust new people easy." "She's not pacing because she's stressed," Harper said. "She's pacing because she's trying to tell somebody something and nobody's listening." She climbed the lower rung of the fence without invitation and held one hand out, palm up, still not reaching, just offering. "Give her a minute." Travis glanced over his shoulder. His eyes caught Wyatt approaching and he straightened fast, the laugh going careful. Wyatt stopped beside the fence and watched. The mare circled once more, then twice. Then she slowed, came a few steps closer, and pressed her nose briefly against Harper's open palm. Not a full surrender, just an acknowledgement, just enough. "How'd you know to do that?" Travis asked, genuinely impressed. "My uncle had horses when I was a kid," Harper said, stepping back off the fence. "He always said the ones that seem the most difficult have usually just been handled wrong. They're not broken. They're just waiting to see if you're going to be different from the last person. She turned and found Wyatt standing 3 feet away, watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not the flat business register he usually wore, but something quieter and more unsettled, like a man who has just overheard something he didn't expect to find meaningful. "You should have told me you were going outside," he said. "I'm not Lily," Harper said. "I don't need supervision." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "A beat. Breakfast is ready." He turned and walked back toward the house. Harper looked at Travis, who was biting the inside of his cheek to keep from smiling. "Is he always like that?" she asked. "Pretty much," Travis said, although he glanced after Wyatt lowered his voice. "He watched you the whole time, from the moment he came out. Didn't say a word, just watched." He shrugged. "First time I've seen him watch anything that wasn't a contract or a horse race in about 2 years. Harper said nothing, but she stored it. Mag. The first real test came 4 days in at a gala dinner hosted by the Silver Ridge Cattlemen's Association, the kind of event where everyone wore money like a second skin, and the social maneuvering was sharp enough to draw blood if you weren't paying attention. Wyatt drove. They didn't talk much on the way. He'd briefed her beforehand who mattered, who was dangerous, who would probe, and who would simply dismiss her without bothering to probe at all. He said it the way a general briefs a soldier before entering complicated terrain, thorough, tactical, emotionally detached. Harper listened and said almost nothing until he was done. Then she said, "What about your ex-wife? Will she be there?" The steering wheel creaked once under his grip. "Diana travels. She's in Colorado this week." "You checked?" "I check." Harper turned to look out the window. "How long were you married?" 6 years. "And Lily was 4 when Diana filed." His voice didn't change temperature exactly. It just went somewhere else, somewhere farther away. Diana didn't want the ranch life, wanted the money without the dirt, wanted the name without the work. I knew that going in, and I married her anyway because... He stopped. "Because you thought love would be enough to change it," Harper said quietly. The truck was quiet for a long moment. "Don't do that," Wyatt said. "Do what?" "Understand things you weren't invited to understand." Harper almost smiled. "I'll try to contain myself." The gala was exactly as advertised, elegant, expensive, and hostile, in the specific, understated way that wealthy social circles reserve for outsiders. The women who approached Harper in the first hour were polished and pleasant and asked questions with barbs hidden inside them, like fishhooks wrapped in ribbon. "How lovely that Wyatt found someone so accessible," said a woman named Sandra Whitfield, whose husband owned the second-largest ranch in the county and whose smile had never once reached her eyes in her entire adult life. "We were all so worried about him after the divorce. He seemed so closed off." "He's doing well," Harper said evenly. "And your family is from Garland originally, near Dallas." "Of course." Sandra's smile adjusted precisely 1 degree. "And what is it you do?" "Harper." "Right now, I'm focused on the ranch, and on Lily," Harper said. "She's had enough transition this past year. Stability matters more to me than a job title." Something shifted in Sandra's expression. Not warmth, the woman didn't run on warmth, but a recalibration. An acknowledgement that the answer had been too clean, too self-possessed, to swat away easily. Across the room, Wyatt was watching. Harper could feel it without looking. The second woman was younger, prettier, and more honest about being unkind. Her name was Bryn Alcott, and she had the particular boldness of someone who had never been told no by anyone she considered important. "You're not at all what I expected," Bryn said, tilting her champagne glass. "Wyatt usually goes for a certain type." "I know," Harper said simply. "That's probably why he changed direction." Bryn laughed, actually laughed, surprised into it. "You're tougher than you look." "Most people are," Harper said, "once you stop expecting them to be decorative." Wyatt materialized at her elbow. 5 minutes later, a glass of water in his hand. He didn't drink at these events, she'd noticed. Another piece of information she filed away, and stood close enough that anyone watching read it as the natural gravity of two people who had chosen each other. "You handled Sandra Whitfield," he said quietly, not looking at her. "She handled herself," Harper said. "I just didn't give her anything to work with. Most women I bring to these things spend the first 30 minutes looking for my approval. I'm not most women." "No." He said it like he was still deciding whether that complicated things or simplified them. "You're not." The trouble arrived, as trouble at those events always did, from the direction you weren't watching. Gerald Marsh appeared at Wyatt's shoulder just after 9 o'clock with a look on his face that said he had information Wyatt needed privately. Wyatt excused himself. He was gone 8 minutes. Harper counted, and when he came back, his jaw was set in the way she'd learned meant something had gone wrong. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "What happened?" "Not here." His hand went briefly to the small of her back the first time he'd actually touched her that evening, and she registered it as functional, purposeful, not personal, and steered them toward the exit. In the truck, he sat for a moment without starting the engine. "Diana's not in Colorado," he said. Harper waited. "She flew back this morning. She had lunch with Catherine Albright from the board." His voice was controlled, the kind of control that is doing a lot of structural work. "Marsh doesn't know what they discussed, but Catherine called him tonight to request an additional meeting. Before the hearing." "That's not necessarily. Diana doesn't do anything without a purpose." He finally started the engine. "She's building something. She does it slowly, and she does it quietly, and by the time you realize what she's constructed, it's already standing." Harper looked at his profile. What does she want? What she's always wanted. He pulled out of the lot. "To watch me lose something." Back at the ranch, the house was quiet. Mrs. Phelps had left a covered plate on the counter and gone home for the night. Lily was asleep. The kind of settled total silence that big houses make after 10 o'clock settled around them. Wyatt stood at the kitchen counter and didn't eat. Harper sat down at the kitchen table and did. After a while, he said without turning around, "You were good tonight." "Thank you. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's true, and because you should know that going into whatever Diana is planning." "What is she planning, do you think?" He turned around. "She'll try to make the board believe this is a sham. She'll try to discredit you, make you look like someone who doesn't belong here." His eyes were direct. "She'll be more sophisticated about it than Sandra Whitfield, and less honest than Bryn Alcott." "I can handle sophisticated," Harper said. "You've never dealt with Diana Calder." "No," Harper agreed. "But I've dealt with women who had money and decided it made their cruelty acceptable. They're all running the same play. They just have more expensive clothes." Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Just sat there. Not with the folder or a contract or a board strategy. Just sat in the kitchen in the quiet house and ate the cold dinner Mrs. Phelps had left. It was the most normal thing Harper had seen him do. It made him look for a moment like a different kind of man than the one he'd been performing all evening. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did he. But the silence between them for the first time had no edge in it. Day 9. Lily got a fever. It was 101 by the time Mrs. Phelps caught it, and Lily, being Lily, stubborn in the specific way of children who have learned that adults will sometimes ignore what they need if they don't escalate, had been quietly miserable for most of the morning without telling anyone. Wyatt was in a conference call with his oil contract attorneys when the temperature reading happened. Mrs. Phelps knocked on his study door, relayed the number, and Wyatt was out of his chair before she finished the sentence, already reaching for his phone to end the call. He stopped in the hallway when he heard Harper's voice coming from Lily's room. "I know it feels awful," Harper was saying. "Fevers are your body fighting. Your body is doing its job. You just have to let it work." "My throat hurts," Lily said. Small voice, rough at the edges. "I know, baby. I'm going to get you some cold water and something to bring that fever down. And then I'm going to sit right here, okay? Right in this chair. You don't have to sleep alone. Promise. I promise." Wyatt stood in the hallway and didn't move for a full 30 seconds. Then he went back to the study quietly and called his attorney back. Not because the contract was more important, but because there was nothing for him to do in that room that wasn't already being done. Because his daughter was being held and cared for, and not alone, and the woman doing it had made a promise like it cost her nothing, like it was the most natural thing she had ever said. He sat at his desk and looked at nothing, and something underneath all that controlled, armored, carefully maintained distance cracked. Just slightly, just at the edges. On day 11, Victoria Calder arrived. Nobody announced her. She simply appeared in the ranch's front hall at 11 in the morning, the way a cold front appears. You didn't see it coming. You just suddenly felt the temperature drop. Victoria Calder was 64, beautiful in the way of women who had decided decades ago to stay that way through sheer disciplined will, and she wore her family's history on her posture like a second spine. She had been the architect of the Calder social dynasty for 30 years. She had approved of Diana because Diana at least understood the rules. She had tolerated Wyatt's divorce because it was a private failure. And she had made exactly zero effort to hide the fact that she considered this new development, this waitress from Garland, an insult to everything she'd spent her life building. She found Harper in the ranch kitchen teaching Lily how to make biscuits. There was flour on the counter. There was flour on Lily's forehead. There was improbably laughter. Victoria stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the scene with the expression of a woman discovering her most formal china cabinet being used as a toy box. "You must be Harper," she said. Harper turned. She knew immediately who this was. She'd been briefed. She set down the rolling pin and said, "Mrs. Calder, it's good to meet you." "Grandmother," Lily said, holding up flour-dusted hands. "Harper's teaching me biscuits." "I see that," Victoria said. She looked at the kitchen, at the mess, at the open bags and scattered utensils, and then she looked at Harper with the full weight of a woman who had spent decades deciding who was adequate for this family and who was not. "May I have a word with you alone?" "Of course." Harper looked at Lily. "Keep working the dough. I'll be right back. Don't work it too much," Lily said seriously, because Harper had told her 3 times not to overwork it, and Lily had the particular attentiveness of a child who has decided to become an expert in the thing she's been given. Harper followed Victoria into the hallway. Victoria turned on her the moment they were clear of the kitchen. "I'll be direct with you," she said, "because I am always direct, and because I think you are intelligent enough to appreciate it." "Please," Harper said. "My son is vulnerable in ways he doesn't show and won't admit. He was destroyed by his marriage to Diana, and he has spent 2 years building a version of himself that is functional but not whole. Whatever this arrangement is, we're married," Harper said steadily. "Whatever this arrangement is," Victoria repeated with the specific patience of a woman who has decided not to argue a point she's already won internally. "I want you to understand that my grandchild is not a casualty I will accept. Lily has been disappointed by adults her entire short life. If you are here for reasons that are not what they appear to be, and I am not saying they are, then I am asking you woman to woman to be careful with her." Harper held the older woman's gaze. "I am being careful with her," she said. "That's why I'm teaching her biscuits instead of pretending the kitchen is off limits. That's why I sat in her room for 4 hours when she had a fever last week. That's why she asked me this morning if she could call me." Harper stopped. Victoria's eyes sharpened. "Call you what?" "She asked if she could call me something other than Harper." Harper's voice held steady. "I told her she could call me whatever felt right." The hallway was very quiet. Something moved through Victoria Calder's expression. Something she had not planned for, and could not immediately file away into any of her existing categories for people and situations. "What did she decide?" Victoria asked. "She's still thinking," Harper said. "I told her there was no rush." Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Then she said in a voice that had lost precisely 1 degree of its formality, "The biscuits. Make sure she doesn't overwork the dough. My mother's recipe required a light hand, and Lily is enthusiastic." She turned and walked back toward the front of the house. Harper stood in the hallway and breathed. She had not been afraid of Victoria Calder, but she had felt every ounce of that conversation, and now that it was over, her hands were steady and her chest was tight, and she was thinking about Lily in the kitchen. Flour on her forehead, small hands working dough, and something was pulling at her in a direction she had told herself from the very first morning she was not going to go. She went back into the kitchen. "How's the dough?" she asked. "Soft," Lily said proudly. "I was gentle." "Good girl," Harper said. She stood next to Lily at the counter and felt the warmth of the kitchen and the warmth of the small person beside her, and she thought about Danny in his hospital bed in Austin, and her mother working double shifts, and the contract upstairs in the folder on her nightstand, the one that said 30 days signed, witnessed complete. 30 days. She was on day 11, and she was in serious trouble. Not because the arrangement was falling apart, but because it was beginning to feel in the quietest and most dangerous way possible, like exactly the opposite. It was Travis who found her 2 nights later sitting alone in the barn after midnight. She'd heard one of the horses, the chestnut mare from the paddock, the one that didn't trust easily, moving in a way that sounded wrong, and she'd come down without waking anyone. The mare was fine, just restless. But Harper had stayed sitting on a hay bale in the quiet, because the house felt too close, and the silence in her room too loud, and sometimes being around animals that had been through hard things and came out the other side was the only company that made sense. Travis appeared with a flashlight and a thermos. "Saw the barn light," he said, sitting down on the bale beside her without being invited. He poured 2 cups from the thermos without asking. It was hot chocolate. Harper stared at it. "Mrs. Phelps keeps the powder in the 3rd cabinet," he offered. "I make it when I can't sleep." "You make hot chocolate at midnight." "Don't judge me." He handed her the cup. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "Right." He looked at the mare. "She's doing better, you know, since you've been here. Doc came by yesterday and said her appetite's improved, said it was probably environmental, that she just needed something to settle around." Harper looked at the horse. The mare looked back, just briefly, just enough. "Things settle around you," Travis said simply, not flirtatious, just honest, the way young people can still be when they haven't yet learned to be strategic about honesty. "The whole ranch feels different. Even the older guys, Hector Davis, they're talking at lunch again. They weren't before." He paused. "Mr. Calder notices too. He just doesn't know what to do with it." "He doesn't have to do anything with it," Harper said. "Yeah," Travis sipped his hot chocolate. "That's what makes it complicated." They sat in the quiet barn in the warm animal smell of hay and horses, and Harper held her cup and thought about complicated things and what it cost to keep pretending they weren't. Somewhere behind the barn walls, across the dark ranch land of Silver Ridge, a storm was building. She could feel it in the pressure behind her ears, in the way the horses had gone still. The kind of storm that doesn't announce itself until it's already arrived. She didn't know yet that by morning everything was going to change. She didn't know that in less than 24 hours, she and Wyatt Calder would find themselves alone in that same barn, not by anyone's design, not by any clause in any contract, with every carefully constructed wall between them, straining against something neither of them had name for yet, but both of them already felt. She finished her hot chocolate. She told herself she was still in control. She almost believed it. The storm hit at just past 2 in the morning. Not gradually, not with any of the polite warning signs that give people time to prepare. It simply arrived, a wall of wind and rain that came down on Silver Ridge like something had been holding it back all week and finally let go. The power across the ranch went out in a single hard blink, and the dark that followed was the specific total dark of a place far enough from the city that there are no ambient lights to soften it. Harper was already awake. She had gone back to the house after Travis left, tried to sleep, failed, and was sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark when she heard the first crash. Not thunder, but something physical, something structural, coming from the direction of the barn. She was up and moving before she finished deciding to move, pulling on her boots without sitting down to lace them properly, grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand. She hit the back porch the same moment Wyatt hit it from the other direction. They looked at each other through the rain for half a second. "The barn," Harper said. "I heard it," Wyatt said. They went. The crash turned out to be a support beam bracket on the east wall old hardware that the storm's pressure had finally defeated. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to rattle the structure and terrify every horse inside. By the time Harper and Wyatt got the animals settled, working in opposite corners of the barn, moving quietly, speaking low, doing the slow, patient work that frightened horses require. The storm had escalated to the kind of violence that made the idea of going back out into it genuinely inadvisable. Wyatt pulled the barn door closed against the wind. The latch caught. The rain drummed the roof like something alive trying to get through. They stood in the lantern-lit dark. The old emergency lantern Wyatt had grabbed from the wall, breathing hard from the exertion of it, surrounded by the sound of the storm, and the gradually settling horses, and there was nowhere else to go. "The bracket needs to be braced until morning," Wyatt said. "There's rope on the south wall," Harper said. "Left side second hook." He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "I've been in this barn every day for 2 weeks." She crossed to the rope without waiting for a response. They worked side by side for 20 minutes in the lantern light, bracing the beam with methodical focus, passing tools and rope back and forth with the easy, wordless efficiency of two people who have found their working rhythm without meaning to. Wyatt held the brace steady. Harper secured the knots tight, clean, exactly right. He watched her hands without commenting on it. When it was done, they had no more task to hide behind. Wyatt sat down on a hay bale. Harper leaned against the opposite wall. The storm showed no sign of letting up. The lantern threw long shadows. The horses had gone quiet. "You didn't have to come out here," Wyatt said. "Neither did you. It's my barn." "That's not why you came," Harper said. He looked at her across the lantern light. "Careful. You keep saying that to me." She held his gaze. "Careful. Don't understand things. Don't look too close. You've been telling me to stop seeing things since the first morning." She paused. "Why does it bother you so much? Being seen?" "It doesn't bother me." "Wyatt?" The way she said his name, not formally, not carefully, just directly the way you say the name of someone you've stopped pretending is a stranger, landed with more weight than either of them had prepared for. He looked away first, then back. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't want you to say anything you haven't decided to say." She pushed off the wall and sat down on the hay bale across from him. "Close enough to be honest about. Not close enough to be reckless. I just think you've spent 2 years building a version of yourself that's completely functional and completely sealed, and you've told yourself that's strength. But you keep acting like love makes people weak, and I think you're really just terrified that someone's going to hurt you the way Diana hurt you, and you won't be able to survive it a second time." The barn was very quiet between words. "You don't know what Diana did," Wyatt said. "No?" Harper agreed. "I know what she left behind." Something moved through his face. A flinch that wasn't quite a flinch, more the specific tightening of a man who has taken a hit he didn't see coming and is deciding whether to admit it landed. "She told Lily I was the reason she was leaving," he said. Flat, quiet, the way people say true things they've never said aloud before, quickly, without inflection, as if the speed and the flatness can keep it from meaning too much. Lily was 4 years old. Diana sat her down and told her that Daddy's work was more important than the family, and that's why Mommy had to go. He stopped. "I didn't find out until 3 months later. Lily's preschool teacher called me, said Lily had told the whole class that her father didn't love her mother enough." Harper did not move. "She was 4, he said again, like the number still didn't make sense to him, like he still hadn't found a way to file it somewhere that didn't hurt. "Wyatt, don't." His voice went rough. "Don't tell me it wasn't my fault. I've heard that. I know it up here." He touched his own chest. "It doesn't matter what I know up here." Harper looked at him across the small lantern-lit space between them. At the man who ran thousands of acres and brokered oil contracts and held a room full of board attorneys, still with nothing but eye contact, sitting in a barn in a thunderstorm, with his hands loose in his lap, looking more breakable than any person she had seen in years. "It wasn't your fault," she said anyway. Not to fix it. Just because it was true, and he deserved to hear it from someone who meant it without an agenda. He looked at her. The lantern flickered once in a gust that found a gap in the wall, and then Wyatt Calder did something she had never seen him do. Not in the boardroom, not at the gala, not in any of the careful public performances of the past 2 weeks. He closed his eyes. He put his hands over his face, and he just stopped holding it together. For 10 seconds, maybe 15. The breath that came out of him was the kind that has been compressed for months, maybe years, looking for the right moment to finally go. Then his hands came down. He looked at her without the armor. And Harper, who had spent 2 weeks building her own careful walls, felt every single one of them go quiet. She didn't decide to close the distance between them, or maybe she did and didn't notice deciding. She moved from her bail to his, and she put her hand over his hand, where it rested on his knee, not reaching, not grasping, just covering it with her palm the way she had held it out to the mare in the paddock. Just offering. Just present. Wyatt looked down at her hand on his. Then he looked up at her face, and he kissed her. Not urgently, not like a man who has finally snapped and abandoned judgment, but like a man who has finally arrived somewhere after a very long trip and set his bag down because he doesn't have the energy to pretend anymore that he wasn't trying to get here. Harper kissed him back. Not for the contract, not because they were being watched, not for any of the calculations and careful arrangements that had brought her to this ranch and this barn and this exact moment. But because she had spent 2 weeks watching a man she expected to be arrogant, reveal himself to be wounded, and 2 weeks watching a little girl she expected to be just a complication reveal herself to be the realest thing in Harper's life, in longer than she could honestly remember, and she was so tired of holding a line that the storm had already washed out from underneath her. When it ended, they sat very still. His forehead rested against hers. "This wasn't in the contract," he said quietly. "No," Harper said. "It wasn't." Outside, the storm was still coming down. Inside the barn, the horses breathed slow and even in the dark. The lantern held. Neither of them moved for a long time, and neither of them said the thing they were both now absolutely certain of. That whatever this was, it had stopped being a transaction sometime in the last 14 days. Had probably stopped being a transaction the moment a small girl with a gap-toothed smile had wrapped her arms around a stranger's neck and asked her not to leave. They did not speak about the barn the next morning, not directly, not in the kitchen over coffee, not across the breakfast table, where Lily chattered about the storm's damage to the equipment shed, not in the hallway when their paths crossed on the way to opposite parts of the house. But everything between them had shifted its weight, the way a room shifts after something heavy has been moved. Nothing visible changed, but your body knows when you walk through it that the floor plan is different now. Wyatt looked at her differently. Not obviously, not in any way that Mrs. Phelps or Travis or Victoria, who arrived for a second visit that afternoon, could name or point to. But Harper felt it in the quality of his attention when she spoke. In the way he no longer left a room she walked into. Lily felt it too, with the specific animal perception of children who have been paying close attention to adult behavior since before they had words for what they were watching. She didn't say anything about it. She just started sitting between them at dinner instead of across from Harper, and she started directing observations to both of them at once, the way children address parents, without hierarchy, without deference. Just the easy assumption that both people are present for the same purpose. It was the most dangerous thing that had happened yet, because it was the most real. Ew. On day 18, Wyatt took her riding. It wasn't planned. He knocked on her door at 7 in the morning and said, "You ride." And she said, "Enough." And 20 minutes later they were out on the east pasture, where the land opened up into the wide flat grassland that Silver Ridge sat on the edge of, and the sky was the particular shade of early morning blue that has no equivalent indoors. They rode without talking for the first 20 minutes. Not uncomfortable silence, the other kind. The kind that means you don't need to fill the air between you because the air is fine as it is. Then Wyatt said, "The east property line runs another 12 miles. My grandfather bought it in 1962 for $40 an acre. People thought he was being reckless. What happened? Oil. 1987. The kind of discovery that changes everything. He was quiet for a moment. He used to say that most people can't tell the difference between a bad investment and a long one, that the timing looks identical from the outside. Harper considered the weight of this. Are you making a point? Just telling a story. Wyatt. She said his name in that same direct way she'd discovered worked like a key in a specific lock. What are you actually saying? He looked at her across the small distance between their horses. I'm saying that I've been making short-term decisions for 2 years because the long-term ones cost me something I wasn't sure I could afford to lose again. He paused. I'm saying I'm not sure I'm still making the same decision I made when Clifton put that contract on the table. Harper's horse walked 3 paces, 5, 10. We still have 12 days, she finally said. I know. The arrangement was 30. I know what the arrangement was. She looked at the horizon line. I don't know what I'd be walking into, she said carefully. I don't mean the money or the social complications or even your mother. I mean, I need to know if you're saying something real or if this is the ranch and the morning light and the aftermath of a thunderstorm, making something feel significant that'll look different once the hearing is over and the pressure's gone. Wyatt stopped his horse. She stopped hers. You want me to prove it, he said. I want you to be honest about whether you can. Those are the same thing. No. Harper said, they're not. Lots of people intend to be honest. Very few people are actually willing to sit in the uncomfortable truth of what honest requires. She met his eyes. What happened in that barn that was real? I'm not pretending it wasn't. But you spent 6 years married to a woman who told you a story about herself that turned out to be false. I'm not Diana. But I also signed a contract that said I would pretend to be your wife. And you need to decide whether you can tell the difference. She let that sit. So do I. He held her gaze for a long time. Then he said, fair enough. And they rode back. But something had been said. Something had been placed between them carefully, honestly, without strategy or performance, and both of them carried it back to the ranch like something that needed to be set down somewhere safe. Diana Calder arrived on day 20, not announced, not invited. She simply appeared at the front of the ranch at 3 in the afternoon, and Harper knew her the moment she stepped out of the car, not because she had seen photos, though she had, but because there is a specific type of beauty that has been deployed as a weapon for so long, it has permanently reshaped its bearer's posture. Diana Calder was 41, immaculate and utterly confident in the belief that whatever room she walked into was already hers. She looked at Harper standing on the front steps with the measuring directness of a competitor who has already done her homework. You must be Harper, she said. I am, Harper said, and you must be Diana. I prefer not to be preceded by a reputation, Diana said pleasantly. Wyatt home. He's in a meeting. I can tell him you're here. I'll wait. Diana moved toward the door like the invitation had already been extended. Harper stepped to the side, just enough the specific amount that communicated cooperation without surrender, and let her pass. Wyatt came downstairs 7 minutes later. Harper heard the conversation from the kitchen. Diana had not closed the sitting room door. Harper was not certain whether that was carelessness or intention. And with a woman like Diana, she had learned not to assume carelessness. I just wanted to see how things were going, Diana was saying. I've been hearing the most interesting things about your new situation. From whom? Wyatt's voice was flat and controlled. Oh, you know how Silver Ridge is. People talk. They say she's sweet, very approachable. A pause. A little too approachable, some say. Wyatt, I'm not here to start anything. I worry about Lily, about what happens when the novelty wears off. That's interesting concern coming from you. I know you're still angry with me. I'm not angry with you, Diana. I stopped being angry with you about 18 months ago. What I am is done. There's a difference. A longer pause. Harper set down her dish towel. "She's not who she says she is," Diana said. And the pleasantness was gone now, replaced with something colder and more deliberate. "I had someone look into her background, Wyatt. She's in financial crisis. Her brother's medical bills are nearly 6 figures. She would have every reason to attach herself to someone with resources. And I think—" "Leave," Wyatt said. "Wyatt, I said leave, now. If you want to discuss Lily's custody arrangement, contact my attorney. If you want to discuss anything else, there's nothing to discuss." A beat of absolute silence. "We're done here." Harper heard footsteps, heard the front door, heard a car engine. She stood very still in the kitchen, holding the dish towel she'd forgotten she'd picked up, feeling something cold move through her chest that she could not fully name. Not quite fear, not quite guilt, but something in the territory between them. Because the thing Diana had said was not entirely false. The crisis was real. The money was real. The reason she had agreed to come here in the first place was exactly what Diana had just described. And she was not the same person now that she had been on that first day. She knew that. She felt the difference in her bones. But she didn't know yet whether Wyatt would be able to see it. She didn't know yet whether it mattered. Wyatt appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her. "You heard," he said. "Yes." He crossed to the coffee maker, poured a cup, set it on the counter without drinking from it. "Everything she said about why you came here is true," he said. "I knew that going in. It's in the contract." Harper waited. "What isn't in the contract," he said quietly, not turning around, "is everything that happened after." He turned then. "I know the difference, Harper. I told you what Diana did, what she's capable of. But I know what's been happening in this house for the past 3 weeks. And I know you." It was the most simply, directly honest thing he had said to her. It was also the most vulnerable. She crossed to the counter and stood beside him. She didn't say anything. She picked up the coffee cup he'd poured and hadn't touched and held it out to him. He took it. They stood there in the kitchen in the late afternoon light, and neither of them said another word. And the silence was the particular kind that comes after you have finally said enough true things that silence feels like rest. 2 days later, it exploded. Harper woke to 3 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize and a text from Travis that said, "Only turn on your phone's news alerts. Now." She found it within 60 seconds. A local Silver Ridge media outlet, the kind that had been operating on rumor and county gossip since before she was born, running a full piece under the headline, "Calder Marriage, a Fraud Contract, Surfaces Revealing Paid Arrangement." The contract was real. All 4 pages. Photographed clear with both signatures visible, and Clifton's witness notation at the bottom. Her name. His name. The payment terms. The 30 days. All of it. Her phone started ringing in her hand before she'd finished reading. She sat on the edge of her bed and felt the specific falling sensation of watching something you have just started to trust collapse through the floor beneath you. The particular vertigo of a person who has spent their whole adult life being careful and still somehow ended up exactly here. She knew who had leaked it before she'd consciously formed the thought. Victoria, not Diana. Diana would have wanted the leak more strategic, more time to the hearing. Victoria Calder, who still did not entirely believe Harper belonged here, who had decided the arrangement needed to end on her terms before it complicated the family legacy any further. By 8 o'clock, the story had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. By 8:30, Wyatt's phone was ringing continuously. By 9, Gerald Marsh had called twice and left voice messages that Harper did not hear, because she was sitting in her room with the door locked, staring at the contract text on her phone screen, trying to think clearly through the specific and paralyzing grief of watching something that had stopped being false get destroyed as though it always had been. Someone knocked on her door. Not Wyatt's knock. Smaller. "Harper." Lily's voice. "Are you okay? I heard Daddy on the phone and he sounded really... I don't know. Are you okay?" Harper closed her eyes. She thought about 30 days, about signatures and payment terms, about Danny in his hospital bed and her mother's double shifts, and the reason she had walked into Clifton's office and signed her name to something she never expected to mean anything. She thought about Lily's face on that first night. Please don't leave like the others. She thought about Wyatt in the barn. His hands over his face, the breath he finally let out. She thought about what Diana had said, and the fact that it wasn't entirely wrong, and the fact that the parts that mattered most were entirely wrong in ways she could not prove to anyone who had already decided to believe the simpler version. I'm okay, baby, she said through the door. Go find Mrs. Phelps for me, okay? Tell her I need a few minutes. A pause. Small footsteps. Silence. Harper sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then she made a decision. It was not a good decision. She would understand that later, would understand it clearly and completely, and with the particular regret of someone who ran from a fight they could have stayed for. But in the specific crushing moment of it, with her name trending on a local gossip site and a contract on her phone screen, and the full weight of every original reason she came pressing down on her, she could not see past the one clear, true thing in her mind. She had never been supposed to be here at all. She packed quietly. She left a note on the kitchen counter, not to Wyatt. Just 2 words to Lily. I'm sorry. She called a car from the edge of the property so the sound of tires wouldn't wake anyone. She walked out of Calder Ranch before sunrise, and she did not look back. Because she knew that if she looked back, if she let herself see the house and the lit barn in the early gray light, and any of the things she had spent 22 days building herself into, she would not be able to keep walking. So she didn't look. She just walked. And the worst part, the part she would carry for much longer than she expected, was not the humiliation of the headlines, or the exposed contract, or even the fear of what came next. The worst part was the certainty sitting quiet and immovable in the center of her chest that she had just walked away from. The first place she had felt completely herself in years. And she had left without giving Wyatt Calder the chance to say a single word about any of it. Wyatt found the note at 6:47 in the morning. 2 words. I'm sorry. Written on the back of a grocery receipt in Harper's handwriting. Small, precise, the kind of handwriting that doesn't waste space. He stood at the kitchen counter and read it 3 times. Then he set it down. Then he picked it up again. He called her phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Same result. He called the car service that covered the county. The dispatcher confirmed a pickup from the edge of the Calder property at 5:14 that morning, bound for the Garland bus terminal. Wyatt stood in the kitchen for a long time after that call. Mrs. Phelps arrived at 7 and found him there still in the clothes he'd slept in. The grocery receipt note, flat on the counter, his coffee untouched and cold beside it. She looked at his face. She looked at the note. She did not ask what happened because she could read the kitchen the way she read everything in this house, in what was present and in what was missing. Lily doesn't know yet, she said. No. She'll be up in 20 minutes. I know. Wyatt picked up his phone again, stared at the screen, put it down. I need to fix this before she wakes up. Mr. Calder. Mrs. Phelps said it in the specific tone she reserved for moments when she had decided to exceed her job description. There is nothing you can fix in 20 minutes that should have been fixed 3 days ago. He looked at her. Forgive me, she said without sounding sorry at all. But that young woman spent 22 days in this house doing everything you asked and more than you deserved, and you let her walk out at 5 in the morning without a single word because you were too busy managing the optics to manage what was actually in front of you. She poured him a fresh coffee, set it on the counter firmly. Drink that, and then figure out what you're actually going to do about it. Wyatt picked up the coffee. He didn't argue. Because she was right, and he knew she was right, and the particular silence of a man who has just been told a precise and painful truth is very different from the silence of a man who simply has nothing to say. Lily came downstairs at 7:22 and asked where Harper was before she sat down, before she touched her breakfast, before she said good morning to anyone. She just walked into the kitchen in her horse pajamas and said, "Where's Harper?" with the directness of a child who has been paying attention long enough to notice when something is wrong before anyone's confirmed it. Wyatt sat down at the table. He had been calculating how to say this since the moment he found the note. He had turned it over and looked at it from every angle, the way he approached every problem, systematically looking for the version that caused the least damage, constructed the most stable outcome. He sat across from his daughter and found that none of those versions were available. "Harper had to go home for a little while," he said. Lily looked at him. 7 years old, dark, serious eyes and the gap-toothed mouth pressed flat in an expression that said she knew the difference between a real answer and a managed one. "Is she coming back?" "I don't know yet." "Did you make her leave?" The question landed like a stone dropped from a height. "No," Wyatt said. "She chose to go." "Why?" "Because some things happened that were—" He stopped. Started again. "Because some people made some things complicated, and she was hurt by it, and she left before I could talk to her." Lily considered this with the grave deliberation she brought to everything that mattered to her. "Then go talk to her," she said. "That's what you're supposed to do when someone leaves because they're hurt. You go after them." Wyatt looked at his daughter. "It's not that simple, Lily." "Why not?" He opened his mouth, closed it. "Daddy." Her voice was patient in the particular way of a child who is running out of patience. "Captain ran away once. Remember, he got out of my room and hid under the stairs. And you said we had to go get him because that's what you do when someone you love goes somewhere they shouldn't have to be alone." She looked at him steadily. "Harper's like Captain. She went somewhere she shouldn't have to be alone. So go get her." Mrs. Phelps at the stove had her back turned. But Wyatt could see the set of her shoulders, could tell she was not entirely unaffected by the metaphor of a stuffed rabbit and a woman who'd left before sunrise being categorized in the same breath. "I'll figure it out," he said. "Figure it out fast," Lily said. She picked up her fork. "She likes her eggs scrambled." He called Clifton first. Not about the contract Clifton had already been fielding. The media calls had already begun drafting the suppression and defamation language they would use against the outlet that published the leak. Wyatt had read the messages without responding to most of them. What he needed from Clifton now was something different. "The leak," Wyatt said. "Tell me what you know." Clifton was quiet for a beat too long. "Tell me," Wyatt said. "Clifton, I've known you 20 years. Don't perform uncertainty at me right now." "The document came from inside the house," Clifton said. "The photograph quality, the angle, the lighting, it was taken in my office. But I wasn't the one who photographed it, and the document was in your files afterward, not gone from them. Someone photographed it without removing it." "Someone who had access to my office?" "Yes." "Diana wasn't in my office." Another beat, longer this time. "No," Clifton said. "She wasn't." Wyatt said nothing for a moment. "My mother." Silence. "I need to handle that separately," Wyatt said. "What I need from you right now is to make sure that when Gerald Marsh and the board look at what happened, they understand the difference between a couple who started with an arrangement and what that arrangement became. Can you make that case?" "I can make any case with sufficient evidence," Clifton said carefully. "The question is what evidence exists." "The workers," Wyatt said immediately. "Travis Hector Davis, Mrs. Phelps. 3 weeks of daily interaction that no contract required. Lily's fever, she sat with Lily for 4 hours that night. Ask Mrs. Phelps. Ask the doctor who came the next day and found everything already handled." He paused. "There's a horse in the east paddock that was failing to eat for 2 weeks before Harper arrived. Doc can confirm the turnaround. That's not in any contract. None of it was." "I'll build the file," Clifton said. "But Wyatt—" "I know. The woman needs to be part of this. Whatever you build with the board, it doesn't hold without her." "I know that too." So, he called Harper's number 11 more times over the following 3 days. She did not pick up. She did not return messages. She sent one text on the second day that said only, "The money from Clifton for the first installment already covered Danny's first round of treatment. Please don't call about the refund clause. I'll make it right. And then nothing. Wyatt stared at that text for a long time. She was worried about the penalty clause, about the money. Even now, even after everything, her first instinct was to be fair to him. The fact that she thought he was calling about the money made something in his chest pull tight with a specific and clarifying pain. He did not text back about the money. He called her mother instead. Ruth Lane picked up on the second ring with the alert, slightly braced quality of a woman who answers unknown numbers during a family crisis, ready for anything. "Mrs. Lane," Wyatt said. "My name is Wyatt Calder. I know Harper has told you about the situation. I need you to know that whatever you've heard in the media, the story is incomplete. And I need to know that your daughter is safe." A long silence. "She's home," Ruth said finally. "She's with Danny. She's managing." The word carried the weight of a mother watching her child perform okay when it costs them something to do it. She went straight to the hospital when she got back, spent the first night in Danny's room. He's responding to the treatment, thank God. He doesn't know everything that happened, and she hasn't told him. "I'm not calling to pressure her," Wyatt said. "I want you to know that. I'm not calling because of the contract or the hearing or any of the things that brought her to Silver Ridge in the first place." "Then why are you calling Mr. Calder?" He didn't have a clean strategic answer for that. He didn't have a folder version or a Clifton reviewed version. He just had the actual answer. "Because she left without letting me say anything," he said. "And I have things I need to say, and I think she deserves to hear them." Ruth Lane was quiet for a moment that stretched considerably longer than comfortable. "She's not ready to hear anything from you yet," she said. "She's still putting herself back together. And my daughter does not put herself back together quickly. She does it right, and she does it alone, and you pushing at her before she's ready will undo everything. I understand. I don't think you do quite yet." Ruth's voice was not unkind, but it was firm in the way of women who have been the load-bearing wall of a family for a long time and know exactly how much weight they can manage. "But I think you might be capable of understanding it. That's why I'm still on the phone." "Tell her I called," Wyatt said. "I'll tell her." He hung up and sat with the phone in his hands and thought about a woman who put herself back together alone and right and slowly, and about how long it had taken him to do the same, and how poorly he'd done it, and how many people in his own house had been collateral to that failure. Victoria came to him on the fourth day. She walked into his study without knocking. She had never knocked in her life, and he had long since stopped expecting it. And she sat down across the desk and folded her hands on her lap and looked at him with the expression of a woman who has decided to do a hard thing and intends to do it precisely. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You owe me considerably more than that," Wyatt said. "Yes?" She did not flinch. "I photographed the contract. I sent it to Garrett Moore at the Silver Ridge Tribune because I believed the arrangement was going to complicate the family's legal position, and that terminating it publicly was more efficient than waiting for it to fall apart privately." She paused. "I was wrong." The stillness in the study was absolute. "You were wrong," Wyatt repeated. "I was wrong about the arrangement," Victoria said, "and I was wrong about Harper." Something shifted in her expression, not softness exactly, but a recalibration, the specific recalibration of a woman who has changed her position and intends to own it completely. "I have spent 40 years protecting this family from things I decided were threats before I had adequate information. I made that same error here." She looked at her son. "She is not a threat, Wyatt. She is the most genuinely good thing that has walked through this house since your grandmother died, and I destroyed it because I was afraid of something I didn't fully understand." Wyatt looked at his mother for a long time. "Can you fix it with the board?" he asked. "I've already spoken to Horace Dunbar," Victoria said, "and to Catherine Albright. I told them the full truth, including my role in the leak. Horace said, and I quote, that the board had already reached its own conclusions about Miss Lane's character, and that my interference was, in his words, a notable waste of everyone's time." Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. He was not incorrect. "And the hearing will be fine." She looked at him steadily. The question is whether anything else will be. On the fifth day, without Harper, Lily stopped eating. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. She just stopped finishing her meals. She sat at the dinner table and moved food around her plate and answered direct questions in the fewest possible words, and went to bed early and without argument, which was the most alarming sign of all, because Lily Calder had been arguing about bedtime since she was 3 years old and showed no natural signs of stopping. Mrs. Phelps told Wyatt on the morning of the 6th day. "She's withdrawing," Mrs. Phelps said. "She's done it before, after Diana left. She gets very quiet and very cooperative, and it looks like she's adjusting, but she's actually just going somewhere inside herself, where she doesn't have to feel it." Wyatt went to Lily's room that evening. She was sitting on her bed with Captain the worn stuffed rabbit in her lap, not doing anything in particular. Just sitting. "Hey," he said, sitting down beside her. "Hey," she said. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him automatically the way she always had, and he held his daughter and felt the specific helplessness of a parent watching their child carry something too heavy and being unable to simply take it away. "I miss her," Lily said. Flat. Factual. The way she'd said it probably a dozen times inside her own head before she said it out loud. "I know, baby. I miss her too." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you going to get her?" "I'm working on it." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true, Daddy." She lifted her head and looked at him directly. "She thinks she doesn't belong here. That's why she left. She thinks she's not the right kind of person for our family." Her voice was steady and 7 years old and completely certain. "You have to go tell her she's wrong. You have to go say it to her face so she believes it, not on the phone." She looked at him. "Captain believed me when I got him from under the stairs because I went to him, not because I called." Wyatt looked at his daughter. "Okay," he said. "Okay, you'll go. Okay, I'll go." Lily settled back against his side. "Good," she said. "Take the truck, not the other car." She liked the truck. He was in Austin by 8 the next morning. He had Danny's Hospital St. Catherine's from the research he'd done before he ever walked into that diner and made his offer to a woman he'd known nothing about. He went to the information desk and asked for Danny Lane's room. The woman at the desk told him visiting hours started at 9. He said he'd wait. He waited. At 9 o'clock, he took the elevator to the 4th floor. He found the room number. He stood outside the door for a full minute, which was longer than Wyatt Calder had stood still outside any door in his adult life, and he listened. He heard Harper's voice. She was reading to Danny. A Western novel from the sound of it, he caught a few words before he knocked. Something about a river crossing and a disputed cattle claim. She was doing the voices slightly, not performing exactly, but enough to make a sick young man laugh quietly at the character accents. He knocked. A pause. Footsteps. The door opened. Harper looked at him. She looked like someone who had slept badly for 6 days and was holding herself together through a combination of routine and love for her brother and the specific stubbornness of a person who has decided that falling apart is not currently an option. She was in a plain shirt and jeans. Her hair was down. She looked more like herself than he'd seen her look at any point during the gala, the board visit, the carefully managed events of Calder Ranch. She looked like the woman from the diner. Before all of it. She looked like the woman he'd been thinking about every hour of the last 6 days. "Wyatt," she said. Her voice was steady. Whatever she was feeling, she had it controlled for now. "I need 5 minutes," he said. "Outside. Please." She looked back at her brother. Danny, visible over her shoulder, younger than Wyatt expected, thin from treatment, but bright-eyed in the way of people whose mind has stayed sharp while their body fights, raised his hand in a small wave. "Go," Danny said. "I'll be here. I've been here. I'm not going anywhere." They stood in the hospital corridor and Wyatt talked. Not strategically. Not with a Clifton-reviewed version or a board-conscious framing. He just talked. He told her what Victoria had admitted. He told her what Clifton had built for the board and what Horace Dunbar had said about the board's own conclusions. He told her what Travis had told the attorney without being asked: the horse's recovery, the ranch workers eating lunch together again, the barn in the storm. He told her what Mrs. Phelps had said. He told her what Lily had said about Captain the Rabbit, and then he stopped. And the corridor was quiet, except for the distant sounds of a working hospital. And he looked at Harper Lane with everything he had stopped performing and just said the actual thing. "I asked you to pretend to be my wife," he said. "I gave you a contract and a timeline and a number that was supposed to make it simple. And somewhere in the middle of all of it," he stopped, collected himself, went on, "you became the reason the house felt like a house again. You became the reason Lily laughed. You became the reason I sat in a barn in a thunderstorm and said the truest thing I've said to another person in 6 years." He held her eyes. "I kept waiting for the right moment to tell you that none of this felt like a contract anymore. And instead, I let you walk out at 5 in the morning thinking you were the one thing in this situation that didn't belong." Harper's jaw worked once. Her eyes were bright. "You didn't call," she said. "For 6 days I waited to hear—" She stopped, shook her head. "No, that's not fair. I didn't pick up." "I know. I was so sure you'd choose the cleaner version. The version where the contract was the whole truth, and I was the problem that resolved itself by leaving." Her voice broke on the last word just slightly, just enough. "It was easier to go than to stay and find out I was wrong about what was happening." "You weren't wrong," he said. "About any of it. Not the barn, not the riding, not any of it." She looked at him. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the folded note "I'm sorry" on the back of a grocery receipt and held it out to her. "I want you to tear this up," he said. "Not because the contract is null, or because the hearing is next week, or because my mother is sorry and my attorney has built a case. But because I need you to know that this—" He held the note up. "This is the last thing I want between us." Harper took the note. She looked at it for a moment. Then she tore it, cleanly in half, then in quarters. She held the pieces in her palm and looked up at him. "There's no contract," she said. "No," he said. "That means there's no money, no arrangement, no terms." She held his gaze. "It means if I come back, it's—" "Because you want to," he said. "That's the only reason that means anything." The corridor was quiet. A nurse passed at the far end without looking at them. Somewhere nearby, a machine registered someone's heartbeat in slow, steady intervals. "Your daughter thinks I'm like Captain the Rabbit," Harper said. "She made me take the truck," he said. "She said you liked the truck." Something shifted in Harper's expression. The careful composure she'd been holding for 6 days moved just slightly, and what came through was not grief or uncertainty, but the specific kind of warmth that doesn't perform itself, the kind that is simply there in a person's face when they stop working against it. "I need to finish reading to Danny," she said. "I know. And I need to call my mother." Her eyes were wet now, not spilling over, just bright. "She told me you called. She said you weren't ready to hear anything from me." She was right. Harper looked at him. "She's almost always right. It's very inconvenient." A beat. "Give me an hour." He said, "I'll be downstairs." She turned back toward Danny's room. Then she stopped, without turning around. "Wyatt?" "Yeah." "When you asked me to be your fake wife, you said it wasn't personal." A pause. "I need you to know that it got very personal." She paused again. "For me, in case that matters." "It matters," he said. "More than I know how to say yet." She nodded. She went back through the door. Wyatt stood in the hospital corridor and let out a breath that had been compressed for 6 days, maybe longer. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the lobby, and for the first time since the morning, he found 2 words on a grocery receipt and felt the particular silence of a house that has gone empty in a way that has nothing to do with how many people are in it. He felt the specific and uncomplicated relief of a man who has stopped running in the wrong direction and is finally pointed toward the one thing that is actually worth moving toward. He had 1 hour. He was going to sit in the truck Lily told him to take, and he was going to wait, and he was going to let Harper Lane take whatever time she needed. Because some things were worth being patient for. And he was finally starting to understand the difference between a bad investment and a long one. She came downstairs at 53 minutes. Wyatt was leaning against the truck in the hospital parking structure, phone in his pocket, not scrolling, not on a call, not doing the 17 things that usually filled every unscheduled minute of his life. Just standing. Just waiting the way he'd said he would. Harper walked toward him and he watched her come and did not move to meet her halfway. Not because he was being strategic about it, but because she was walking toward him on her own terms at her own pace. And that was the only version of this that was going to mean anything, and he understood that now in a way he hadn't understood much of anything 3 weeks ago. She stopped a few feet away. "Danny wants to meet you," she said. Wyatt blinked. "Now," he said, and I quote, "any man who drives 4 hours to a hospital parking lot deserves at least a handshake." She paused. He also said, "If you're the reason his sister finally stopped looking exhausted all the time, he owes you one." "You stopped looking exhausted?" "Apparently." The corner of her mouth moved. "Apparently it happened around day 3. He saw it in a video call and I didn't realize he'd noticed." Wyatt looked at her for a moment. Then, "I'd like to meet him." "Good." She turned back toward the entrance. "He's already told the nurses there's a cowboy coming up. I don't know what he's set up, but I apologize in advance." Danny Lane was 24, thin from treatment, but exactly as bright-eyed as he'd appeared over Harper's shoulder, with the kind of quick, dry humor that seemed to run in the family, and the specific sharpness of a young man who has spent a significant amount of time in a hospital bed with nothing to do but observe people carefully. He shook Wyatt's hand with a grip that said he had not entirely forgiven the universe for making him this sick, and he was not planning to. "So you're the millionaire cowboy," Danny said. "That's one way to put it," Wyatt said. "Harper has about 6 ways to put it," Danny said. 4 of them are neutral. 2 of them she used before she figured out she liked you. He looked at his sister. She looked at the ceiling. "I'm not going to pretend I know everything that happened. She gave me the edited version. But I know she left at 5 in the morning, and I know she spent the first night home sitting in that chair." He pointed to the corner chair. "Not sleeping, pretending to read. And I know the difference between my sister being sad and my sister being sad about something specific." "Danny," Harper said. "I'm almost done," he said pleasantly. "Mr. Calder, she's the person who learned to read to me when I was sick as a kid. She's the person who took a second job at 16 so Mom wouldn't have to work weekends. She is without any exaggeration the best person I have ever personally known." He looked at Wyatt directly. "So I'm going to ask you one thing, and I need you to answer it straight." "Go ahead," Wyatt said. "Are you here because of the hearing? Or are you here because of her?" The hospital room was very quiet. "I'm here because 6 days without her in the house was enough to show me exactly what the house is worth without her in it," Wyatt said. "Which is considerably less than I thought it was." Danny looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Harper. Then he settled back against his pillows with the satisfied expression of a young man who has just received the answer he was looking for and intends to accept it without further ceremony. "Okay," he said. "You can have her back." "I'm right here," Harper said. "I know," Danny said. "I'm talking to the man. It's a thing men do. Don't make it weird." Vague. She drove back to Silver Ridge with Wyatt in the truck Lily had specified. They stopped once outside of Waco for coffee and gas. Harper held her cup with both hands the way she always did and looked at the road ahead and said, "I need to tell you something before we get back." "Tell me." "I was going to pay back the 50,000, she said. "I had a plan. It would have taken me about 3 years, but I had the math worked out." "I know." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because you texted me about the refund clause before you texted me anything else. And because you're the kind of person who would spend 3 years paying back money rather than spend 1 hour having a conversation." He kept his eyes on the road. "The money stays where it is. Danny needs the treatment. That's not something I'm negotiating." Wyatt? Non-negotiable, he said, simply, flatly, in the tone he used when something had already been decided. Harper looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the road and said, "You're very difficult." "You knew that from the booth," he said. "I did," she agreed. "I signed the contract anyway. Best bad decision you ever made. Top 3 maybe." But the corner of her mouth had moved again, and this time it stayed. Nebag. Calder Ranch received them the way a place receives people who belong to it, not with ceremony, but with the particular ease of a space that has adjusted to someone's presence and notices when it's restored. Mrs. Phelps met them at the back door, with the expression of a woman who had been proven right about something, and was going to accept that victory quietly, because she was too professional to gloat, and too human not to feel it. Lily came down the stairs 3 steps at a time, which was technically against the house rules, and launched herself at Harper before Harper had fully cleared the doorway. Harper caught her. Of course she caught her. She held the small body against her chest, and Lily pressed her face into Harper's shoulder and said something that was muffled by Harper's jacket, but that everyone in the hallway heard anyway. "You came back," Lily said. "I came back," Harper said. "I knew Daddy would get you. Captain always comes back when you go get him." She pulled back and looked at Harper with dark, serious eyes. "Did you decide what I can call you?" Harper looked at the little girl. She looked at Wyatt standing 2 feet away, watching his daughter with the open, unguarded expression he had stopped trying to hide sometime in the last week. "What do you want to call me?" Harper asked. Lily considered this with the gravity she brought to everything important. "I want to call you Mom," she said. "But only if that's okay. Because Captain is Captain and that's his name and names should be right." The hallway was very still. "That's okay," Harper said. Her voice was steady, just barely. "That's more than okay." Lily nodded with the satisfied finality of a 7-year-old who has resolved a matter she's been thinking about for weeks. Then she wriggled down, took Harper's hand and said, "Mrs. Phelps made pot roast. Come on." And just like that, dinner happened. The way dinner had been happening in that kitchen for the past 3 weeks, with Lily talking too much and Wyatt talking in measured increments, and Mrs. Phelps circling the table like a planet with a very specific orbit. And now Harper in the chair that had become her chair, with the coffee she drank black and the easy back and forth that a family develops when it has stopped being careful around itself. It was the most ordinary thing. It was also the most extraordinary thing Wyatt Calder had sat in the middle of in as long as he could remember. The inheritance hearing happened 8 days later. Wyatt had expected it to be difficult. He had prepared for it to be difficult. Clifton had prepared extensively. Victoria had spoken to the board. The witness statements from the ranch staff had been submitted. The documentation was thorough. But preparation and outcome are not the same thing, and Wyatt had been disappointed by rooms like this before. He was not disappointed this time. Harper sat beside him and answered every question Horace Dunbar asked, with the directness and self-possession she brought to everything, not performing, not consulting the floor or the ceiling, not hedging. When Gerald Marsh asked about the origins of their relationship and the nature of the arrangement, she did not flinch and she did not dissemble. "We started with a contract," she said. "That's true, and I came to Silver Ridge because my brother needed help I couldn't provide on my own. That's also true." She looked at Marsh evenly. "What's equally true is that I have never in my life met a man who works as hard as Wyatt Calder to protect the people he loves. I have never seen a child better cared for than Lily, and I have never, not once in 22 days or in everything that came after, seen Wyatt act out of anything less than complete commitment to this ranch, this family, and the people who depend on him." She paused. "You can verify the contract if you like. What you cannot verify, because it isn't in any document, is what actually happened. But I'm telling you what happened. And I'm telling you that if you're looking for evidence that Wyatt Calder is capable of building a stable family, you're looking at it." The room was quiet after that. Catherine Albright looked at her lap. Horace Dunbar made a note. Gerald Marsh took his glasses off and set them on the table. Wyatt did not look at Harper. He looked straight ahead. but his hand resting on the table between them moved 1 inch to the left and covered hers. She turned her hand over under his. Palm to palm, fingers closed. Neither of them moved for the rest of the hearing. The board's decision came in 48 hours, the fastest ruling in the Calder estate's history, according to Clifton, who delivered the news with the restrained satisfaction of a man who has fought a long case and won it cleanly. Full inheritance, no oversight, no contested authority. The Calder Ranch empire remained intact, undivided, and entirely under Wyatt's authority. Victoria received the news in the front sitting room. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back very straight, and her face composed in the way of a woman who does not make an open performance of either her failures or her recoveries. She looked at Wyatt. She looked at Harper. "I owe you an apology," she said to Harper. "A real one, not a qualified one." "You were protecting your family," Harper said. "I was protecting my version of my family," Victoria said. "There's a difference. And I was wrong about which version was worth protecting." She paused. Something moved through her expression, not softness exactly, but something real, something that had stopped trying to look composed and was just being honest. "Lily called me this morning," she said. "She told me she's decided what to call you." "She told me too," Harper said. "She told me she thought I should know because—" Victoria stopped, steadied. "Because she said you were her mom now, and she wanted her grandmother to know because grandmothers should know important things about their grandchildren." A beat. "She is 8 years away from being a teenager, and I am already afraid of her." "So am I," Harper said. Something cracked in Victoria Calder's expression. Something that if pressed a person might call the beginning of a smile. Small, controlled, but real. "She gets it from Wyatt," Victoria said. "She gets it from your mother Ruth," Wyatt said. Victoria looked at her son. The smile, if that's what it was, held for 1 more second. Then she stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked out of the sitting room the way she always walked out of rooms, with complete authority, as though the exit had been her idea from the beginning. But in the doorway she paused, without turning around. The pot roast. Mrs. Phelps made it twice while Harper was gone. Nobody ate it properly either time. She left. Wyatt looked at Harper. "That's as close to a welcome as she's ever given anyone," he said. "I know," Harper said. "I'll take it." Dar. The Silver Ridge Rodeo Festival came every September, 3 days of competitions, live music, food stalls, and the specific communal energy of a western town that has been doing this for 70 years and intends to do it for 70 more. The whole county showed up. The Calder family had sponsored it for the last 15 years. It was the kind of event that was in Silver Ridge as close to civic religion as anything got. Harper hadn't expected to be there. She had come back to the ranch without a title, without a timeline, without any formal definition of what she was or what she was building. She and Wyatt were not pretending anything anymore, but they were also moving carefully real this time, which meant slower than the contract version, more deliberate, more honest about the distance still to cover. She spent her mornings with Lily. She spent her afternoons in quiet conversation with Wyatt about the things that mattered: Danny's next treatment round her degree, that she was going to finish the East Paddock horse, whose name she had finally decided was Grace. She was not waiting for anything. She had stopped waiting. She was just living in the days as they came, and the days were good, and she had learned enough by now to understand that good days were not something to be suspicious of. The festival's second night, Lily dragged her to the main field by the hand. Travis was there, and Hector and Davis, and a dozen other ranch hands who had become as familiar to her as family. Mrs. Phelps was somewhere near the food stalls. Victoria Calder was standing with Catherine Albright in a way that suggested a fragile peace between two women who had both recently revised their opinions of something. The field smelled like wood smoke and horses and fried food, and the specific sweetness of Texas grass at the end of summer. Harper was talking to Travis about Grace's latest appetite update when she heard Lily say loudly, and with the pure theatrical confidence of a 7-year-old who has planned something, "Daddy, now." Harper turned. Wyatt was walking toward her through the crowd, and people were stepping back, not because they'd been told to, but because something about his posture communicated that this was not a casual walk across a festival field, and people who have lived in small towns their whole lives know how to read that. He stopped in front of her. The music from the stage had drifted to something slow. The crowd had gone quieter than festival crowds usually go. Harper looked at him. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done when it was actually true," he said. "Not when it was a contract. Not when it was a strategy. Now. When there's nothing behind it except the fact that I would like to spend the rest of my life with you in it. And I would like everyone in Silver Ridge to know that's a choice I'm making, not a clause I'm fulfilling." He reached into his jacket pocket. The ring was not what she expected. It was not a statement piece, not the kind of ring that announces money. It was a simple gold band with a single stone the color of amber, like the late afternoon light over the east pasture, like something warm and enduring and chosen with care. "It was my grandmother Ruth's," Wyatt said. "My mother had it. She gave it to me this morning." He paused. "I told her what I was going to do. She said, 'It's about time,' which is the closest she's come to a blessing in 64 years, so I'm taking it." Harper looked at the ring. She looked at his face. She looked at the man she had agreed to pretend for, and ended up finding instead the man behind the Millionaire Cowboy image, behind the control and the armor, and the years of damage, the man who had held his hands over his face in a lantern-lit barn, and let the breath finally go. "There's no contract," she said. "No terms. No exit clause." "No," he said. "Just me asking, and you deciding." "If I say yes," she said carefully, "it means I'm staying, not for 30 days. "I know what it means." "Lily calls me Mom." "I know." "Your mother is going to have opinions for the rest of her natural life." "I know that too." "And I'm going to finish my degree. And I'm going to help run the East Paddock the way I've been doing because I'm better at it than the 3 people you had doing it before, no offense." "None taken, you are." Harper looked at him for one more long moment. The festival field was quiet around them, in the specific way that crowds go quiet when they've collectively decided to witness something. "Yes," she said. He slid the ring on her finger. The crowd did not erupt immediately. It went through one more second of held breath, the kind that comes right before the kind that means everyone felt it, and then it broke open into exactly the sound that Silver Ridge, Texas makes when something true has happened inside it. Lily came through the crowd at full speed. She hit them both at once, arms around Harper's waist, face pressed between them, and shouted something that was partially lost in the noise, but that both Harper and Wyatt heard clearly. "Now we're a real family forever." Harper held the small, fierce body of the girl who had decided she was Mom on the very first night, and she looked at Wyatt over Lily's head, and he was looking back at her with the open, unguarded, unperforming face of a man who has finally stopped being afraid of the thing he wanted most. In the months that followed, Calder Ranch changed the way places change when the people in them have stopped fighting themselves gradually, without announcement, in the accumulation of small, ordinary things that are only visible when you look back. Danny Lane left St. Catharines in October, declared clear of the worst of it, with a recovery timeline that his doctors called remarkable, and that Danny himself called inevitable because he was 24 and stubborn, and had a sister who had been refusing to let him give up, since he was old enough to understand giving up was an option. He came to Silver Ridge for Thanksgiving. He and Travis became inexplicably immediate and lasting friends. He taught Lily 3 card tricks. He told Wyatt unprompted at the end of the holiday weekend, "You're not what I expected. That's a compliment. I set a very low bar and you cleared it by a significant margin." Wyatt said, "I'll take it." "Harper uses that phrase," Danny said. "I know," Wyatt said. "I got it from her." Ruth Lane came for Christmas and spent 3 days in quiet communion with Mrs. Phelps over the kitchen, which produced the best food Calder Ranch had seen in 20 years, and a friendship between 2 women who had spent their lives being the load-bearing walls of families that didn't always notice until the walls were gone. Victoria Calder learned over the course of those months to knock before entering rooms. This was widely considered by everyone in the house to be the most significant personal growth she had ever undertaken. Grace, the chestnut mare from the East Paddock, the one that hadn't trusted easily, was eating full portions by November. She let Lily brush her in December. She let Lily sit on her back, led carefully by January. Travis sent Harper a photo of it with no message, just the image, and Harper sent back 3 words, "I told you." The inheritance board filed its final papers in November. The Calder estate was settled legally and entirely with no contested authority and no oversight requirement. Gerald Marsh sent a brief handwritten note that arrived in the ranch's mail in early December. It said, "Miss Lane, I have been practicing law in this county for 31 years. In that time, I have watched a great number of people enter rooms they were not supposed to belong in and fail to hold their ground. You are not among that number. Congratulations to both of you." Harper put the note in the drawer of the nightstand. The one that was hers. In the room that was hers. In the house that was theirs. On a Tuesday morning in late January, Wyatt found her at the kitchen counter with her laptop open to her university portal, the cursor blinking in the enrollment field for the spring semester business management courses she was finally returning to. He set coffee down beside her without being asked. "Black." "How many credits?" he said. 3 to finish," she said. "Back by May." "Good." He stood beside her at the counter, looking at the screen. "What's the concentration?" "Agricultural business management." She looked up at him sideways. "Thought it might be useful. Given the East Paddock situation and the oil contract renewal schedule, and the fact that your budget spreadsheets for the feed supplier accounts are a disaster." "They're not a disaster. Wyatt, I reorganized them in 20 minutes last week." "I know. I've been using your version." He picked up his coffee. Clifton was impressed. Harper looked back at her screen. She clicked enroll. The confirmation appeared immediately, bright green, clean final. She had not realized until the breath came out of her that she'd been holding it. Wyatt put his hand on the counter beside hers, not covering it, just close, just present. "Hey," he said. "Yeah, we're good," he said, simply, flatly, in the tone he used when something had already been decided. Harper looked at his hand next to hers. She looked at the amber ring on her finger, his grandmother's ring, Ruth's ring, the one chosen carefully and given without ceremony and worn now like it had always been there. She looked at the kitchen she had walked into before sunrise on her first morning here and found already warm, already lit, already waiting. She thought about the diner and the contract and the booth and the number that was supposed to make everything simple. She thought about a little girl at the base of a staircase in horse pajamas, asking not to be left. She thought about a barn in a thunderstorm and a man who put his hands over his face and finally stopped holding it together long enough to let something real come through. She thought about what it had cost to walk out before sunrise. She thought about what it had given her to walk back in. "Yeah," she said. "We're good." And that was the truth of it. Not the contract, not the arrangement, not the 30 days, or the hearing, or the headlines that had come and gone like bad weather over flat land. The truth was a kitchen and a child asleep upstairs with a stuffed rabbit named Captain, and a man standing close enough to be chosen, and a woman who had come here for one reason and stayed for every reason that mattered. The fake marriage had cost Harper Lane 30 days. The real one gave her the rest of her life. And love, the kind that starts in the most unlikely places, the kind that survives being tested and misread and nearly destroyed, turned out to be exactly as Wyatt Calder had been afraid it would be, the most powerful force on the ranch. The only difference was, this time he wasn't afraid of it anymore.